Assalamualaikum and a very good evening. For my presentation today, I'll be discussing a case on push payment fraud and how the court used equitable remedies to deal with a modern cyber scam. What makes this case interesting is that even though the fraud happened online, the court still relied on traditional legal principles to resolve it. The plaintiff in this case is Zschimmer Schwarz Gmbh and Co. KG, a German company that manufactures specialty chemical products. The plaintiff became a victim of what is known as push payment fraud. In simple terms, this happens when someone is tricked into transferring money themselves, believing the payment is genuine. Here, unknown fraudsters, referred to as the first defendant, persons unknown, managed to interfere with email communications between the plaintiff and his legitimate South Korean business partner. By impersonating that partner, the fraudsters convinced the plaintiff that a real payment was due. Trusting the email, the plaintiff transferred about 123,000 euros, which is roughly RM 600,000 ringgit, into a CIMB bank account in Malaysia, not knowing that it was a part of a scam. That account was controlled by the second defendant, Muhammad Azwan bin Othman, was operating under the name Premier Outlook Services. On the same day the money came in, he quickly transferred the funds into 4 different bank accounts, including his own personal account. The speed of these transactions strongly suggested that the money was being moved to avoid detection. Further tracing later showed that RM 250,000 ringgit went to the proposed third defendant, a former owner of the business, and RM 50,000 went to the proposed fourth defendant, whose business license had already expired. To find out where the money went, the plaintiff obtained a discovery order against CIMB Bank and CIMB Bank Islamic Bank. These orders were crucial because they allowed the plaintiff to trace the movement of the funds after they entered Malaysia. The discovery showed that the transfers were labelled with descriptions like commission services and exchange services, which raised serious doubts about whether these were genuine business transactions. Because there was a real risk that the money would disappear, the plaintiff immediately took legal actions and obtained freezing injunctions, and later applied to include the additional recipients as defendants. The main issues before the High Court were fairly straightforward. First, whether the plaintiff should be allowed to amend its claim to add the third and fourth defendants. Second, whether the court could grant proprietary injunctions on the basis that the money was traceable and held on constructive trust. Third, whether marital injunctions were necessary to prevent further dissipation of assets. And finally, whether a self-identification order and substitute service should be allowed. The High Court allowed all of the plaintiff's applications. The court held that adding the third and fourth defendants was done in good faith and was necessary to fully resolve the dispute. The court also granted proprietary injunctions, finding that the plaintiff's money had been obtained through fraud and could be clearly traced into the defendants' bank accounts. Applying the case of Vice Landesbank and Islington, the court held that a constructive trust arose over the misappropriated funds. In addition, the court also granted marital injunctions, as there was a real risk that the assets were further dissipated. This was supported by the rapid movement of funds and lack of legitimate business activity. The court also granted a self-identification order against the unknown fraudsters and allowed the substituted service against the second defendant, who was deliberately avoiding the service. Overall, this case shows that courts are still able to deal effectively with cyber fraud using existing legal tools. The court's focus on tracing and preserving the money was especially practical and necessary. However, the case also highlights a limitation. Freezing injunctions do not always guarantee recovery, especially if the funds move out of the jurisdiction. It also shows that the law often reacts after the fraud has already happened. In conclusion, this case is a good example of how equitable remedies continue to play an important role in protecting victims of modern fraud, even in a digital setting. That's all from me. Thank you for listening. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.